I mean, I can see certainly people who are sucked into the space realizing like what's going on and that their identity is being weaponized against them and other people from that background. But those who are getting the bag, Peterson, Owens, no,
No.
no. As long as the bag keeps going, they'll stay until the day of the rope.
Mm-hmm. And
Yes,
I forget the book. Sorry, go for it.
No, you're good.
I forget the book, but I read a book about how after the Civil War, when like Reconstruction was going on, and this was sort of the age of Jim Crow stylings. Black people, very few, obviously, but some black men in particular would join up with Klan organizations and pose in their pictures in order to do pretty much exactly what's going on here. They would allow themselves to be called, derogatory names. They would put on minstrel performances and stuff like that as entertainment, collect their check. Can't imagine it was as much as Jesse Lee Peterson is getting, and buzz off. I think that's just, exemplary for how these conditions, economic conditions, are, not giving us an inroad to changing these things at all.
Yeah, so I want to go back to something you mentioned about like for these far right personalities, right? How their sexual indiscretions or hypocrisies and whatnot kind of matter less and less depending on sort of the context. Because for someone like Nick Fuentes, I think Gremlo touched on it earlier, where he's like literally telling his cult following like actually having sex with women is gay and therefore not a good thing. I don't know how, like, again, terminally online you are, but like reconcile that with the cat boy saga, because that was a whole ass thing where if you went on a date with a cat boy, like typically that would be like a game ender. Like you're no longer the head of this internet micro cult because you went on a date with a cat boy and like liked a bunch of trans porn and like follow trans people on Twitter. Like for right wingers, that used to be like, all right, you're done. Like get out. You're a fucking perverted degenerate who will be smited by God at the end of times. But now it's like cool. Like they're in this weird awkward middle ground where they're willing to almost like tolerate it to achieve their goals. Like that's what it feels like to me. But maybe I just kind of want to like see what you think of that, and maybe as an extension of that, like is this the only? I don't know what else like as a consequence of your research, but like was that the only catboy date? Is this like a mainstay? Are there more catboys than just the one?
So I will say the trans porn thing, at least one of the trans porn things was probably fake. It was probably shopped, at least from my estimation. Okay. Catboy thing, I mean, I trust Kiwi Farms as being probably the only legit internet archive existing. So honestly, that one just got to be true. But in reality, I think you're absolutely right that this sort of, I guess, willingness, this tolerance to degeneracy is becoming a bit more common, but it's always been around. I think that, if you are basing your political organizing off of the notion that whites are going extinct and you got to do something, otherwise you're going to, get, ravaged by a horde of, everyone who isn't a white dude, then you're going to accept perhaps the manifestations of desires that you also happen to have in order to maintain a political organization like America First and its legitimacy in order to keep that engine going. I think so. Some of it is just pure cost-benefit analysis, but fundamentally, I think the reality of it, whether they realize this or not, is that they want to fuck the catboy too. And so how can they be mad at a guy for getting the game that they want to get?
Yeah. They also don't they don't do gatekeeping in on the right. They don't say like, oh no, like it's not my job to educate you, something we hear on the left a lot. It's not my job to educate you. There's no purity testing. It's so long as you don't threaten like our end game, so long as you don't threaten like our path, we'll accept any imperfect soldier of God.
I mean, no, that's a fair point. I mean, I think maybe, I guess, like, my question would be more directed maybe at that higher order point where like that's kind of the manifestation of the right that we see now, where they're willing to just take anybody and radicalize the living shit out of them. But like back in like the Reagan days, as an example, like there was still almost like a standard, right? Like you had to be like a hoity-toity, capital C capitalism supporting whitewashed, clean-looking Republican. So I guess like maybe are the rise of sort of these like internet cults of personality around people like Fuentes, like is that a sign that like that entire notion is just like dead and buried? Like is it no longer just this idea of having an image or optics of being a Republican, and now you can just be whatever sort of sexually repressed demon you want to be?
I think the important thing to keep in mind, the answer is not no, but that the image of what you have to be in order to, be the ideal citizen that these people want to organize their whole lives around has always been changing over time. For instance, like homosociality was pretty much a mainstay in, hegemonic ideas of white masculinity in the US around the turn of the century. Things that, Republicans would decisively consider to be sus today were, pretty much rites of passage in one time. And of course, that changes a lot in a lot of different contexts. My honors thesis as an undergrad, in fact, was about the Wolves of Vinland, which is essentially a far-right pagan gay cult in Virginia, my home state. Unfortunate. Conveniently located near Lynchburg, Virginia. They posted pictures of themselves doing neo-pagan rituals and being hella gay. And of course, those people were not getting championed by the Republican Party or anything, but they were still providing an avenue for gay men to find a place for themselves within reaction. So if we think about this less as partisan politics, which, I don't think this is the platform for thinking about politics in such a narrow way. And we think of it more as like the people who are, the agents of the most vitriolic forms of reaction and those who oppose those things, then that sphere, that reactionary sphere, is always going to have different ways of participating in it, some of which just happen to be way more repressed than others.
Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, because I think it was just hinting at the higher order sort of assessment. So that makes good sense. Greg, oh wait, actually, hang on. Professor Q asks, repeat the name of that group, the really gay Nazis in Virginia.
Yes, Wolves of Vinland.
Is that Vinlund?
Yeah, Vinland.
Vinland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Named after the first lands that Leif Erikson discovered, the land of vines.
Oh, I thought it was named after the anime. I'm kidding.
No. No. That's what the anime named it after. Leif Erikson's first lands in Newfoundland, Canada, where had a lot of vine bushes, so they call it the land of vines. Vinland.
Got it. All right, Greg, since you just got here first.
Hello.
How's it going, dude?
Good, man. Thanks.
Yeah, so checking in. Nice to say hi. We've been pestering poor Reed with a bunch of questions, so could change the pace a little bit if you happen to have any, just like off the top of your head.
I am just getting some stuff situated. I've read some of your. Yeah, just give me a second. I was trying to get situated and stuff. I have some some questions from the reading, so I just need to get the quotes ready and stuff. So
got it. Okay. Oh God, I had another question. Insofar as, okay, actually, I think I could probably swing this because Chad was mentioning this earlier. I think it was Ambiguibot alluded to the notion of deplatforming, and I've gotten a lot of like variable opinions as it pertains to the efficaciousness of deplatforming, especially from people in sort of like the pro-vaccine sphere. As far as Nick Fuentes and Groypers and Groyper content is concerned, are you of the opinion that deplatforming is effective?
That, this is like the essence of what I'm trying to answer with all this stuff, because the overwhelming consensus for the majority of the field has been, yes, duh, you get the people off the internet, that means that they're no longer on the internet. But The internet has a lot of layers to it. You're only removing them from a very superficial degree of that internet space. Because if you're rich, like Fuentes is, you can do exactly what Fuentes did, which is make a platform where you are the person who writes the terms of service. Do I think that deplatforming is a thing that major social media platforms should do? Yes, absolutely. When I think that terms of service should be written in such a way that is, relatively hostile to fascism. And I think that that should continue in any system. But ultimately, when the internet is such a place where anybody who's rich enough and knows the right, service provider and knows the right payment provider can, just make something up as they go, which has been the case for Stormfront and Weave for the past decade, containing the Nazi movement despite being deplatformed anywhere. It's sort of like a Band-Aid to a bullet wound, It's maybe going to do important stuff in the short run, but it's not going to get to, as you said, that higher order issue that, these people are producing content that ultimately is making an audience for itself. And that audience sometimes doesn't need to be on Twitter and sometimes isn't better off on Twitter and does even better for itself when it gets containerized into some echo chamber like Gab, because it's not going to be challenged there. So yes and no, I think it needs to happen. I don't think it does everything that it says it does or that we need it to do.
Yeah, that's where a lot of my questions were. Like when I was reading your piece on the Pittsburgh Always Anti-Fascist article, I thought that was really good. You were so it's interesting. I mean, I've been reading a lot Trotsky's what is fascism and what he was talking about, and it's really interesting. I mean, you basically have in the prologue, you basically have people saying so. I mean, the gist of it is that they were basically saying that the Stalinists were calling people that wanted a united workers' front in order to battle, the rise in fascism. They're basically calling them social fascists and calling them, lumping them in with everyone else. And in Trotsky's essays, he's talking about basically how that fails because there's never a purity. There's a purity problem. It's never pure enough where it's like you're banning fascists directly. Now you're banning, the friends of fascists and that kind of stuff. And it's like you could always be more pure kind of thing. And that's kind of what Stalin was pushing. And it's kind of interesting in your piece because you're talking about McCarthyism coming up from that, and it's kind of like now these reactionaries are now using this censorship, the deplatforming thing that people on the left used tried to defeat Nazis. Spoiler alert, they didn't win. Nazis came anyway. And then now you're talking about in 1946, the greater civil rights era, quote, one of the most immediate fronts of anti-fascist struggle in this period was the struggle against censorship and for the preservation of civil liberties, especially censorship of communists, socialists, unionists, and other left-wing academics, activists, and public figures. And it goes on. I mean, it's a really good piece. I recommend people reading it. But after the end of the war in Europe, the alliance of convenience between the United States and the Soviet Union quickly disintegrated, beginning the Cold War and a subsequent wave of repression against the communists that would be felt by Pittsburgh's anti-fascist scene. So I'm leery of this attempt of having Amazon through Twitch and Google via YouTube be these arbiters of anti-fascist struggle when we all know if Google was there's a bill coming online going down the legislature to break it up, anti-capitalists, communists, whatever they're going to label you as, that they're going to try to shut that down too. So I guess I was wondering what your thoughts on that, and yeah.
Yeah, man. I think that it's really difficult to parse this out sometimes in public discussion because I think a difference has to be made between what we want sort of imminently, ideal. Obviously, ideally, we don't want Amazon to exist, we don't want Facebook to exist, right? And what we currently have available to us. I think that anti-fascists are more or less not wasting their time, but their time could be spent better elsewhere if they're spending their time petitioning, their enemies to do something about their other enemies, essentially, which would be deplatforming strategies or the petition thereof. I think they're relatively all right that they exist, but I think you're very correct that what gets kind of underthought in a lot of ways is how these policies will be used unjustly against the left. It's already happening. Biden's anti-terrorism statement in 2021, I want to say, was calling out anarchists by name with the same veracity in certain contexts, albeit not the same rhetoric, as he's calling out white nationalists, because he thinks that we're two sides of the same polarization coin, which I think is kind of the issue with this deplatforming stuff. The issue will be toxicity, or the issue will be, using a curse word, hence you get keyword-based bans, as opposed to the issue being fucking racism,
Yeah, you just illustrated an endless debate that happens within anarchist, communist, and activist circles. Do we try and appeal to the bourgeois liberal establishment that some kind of action needs to be taken, or do we, as a community, take action into our own hands in a kind of collective vigilantism and try and combat them in the streets, where the only place that the bourgeois liberal establishment won't go?
Exactly right. And at least in Pittsburgh, obviously that's the context in which the anti-fascist thing was written. So, some of those conclusions probably can't be extrapolated like completely universally. But something that I notice in Pittsburgh a lot, and I've heard from, comrades elsewhere is also happening in their cities, is this rhetoric of diversity of tactics being used to prevent us from criticizing and prevent us from having those serious questions about, all right, yeah, sure, diversity of tactics, but, we have to have some selection criteria to figure out when we should be doing certain tactics and in what contexts we should be doing them. I'm not an opponent of ever petitioning bourgeois institutions. I think that that's just solipsism and idealism at the end of the day. But in this context, I think it's just, stands to reason at this point that we're going to find a lot more of a cure for antisocial fascism in creating a social movement, as opposed to petitioning the people who are keeping us in these antisocial conditions.
Yeah, the Abby Hoffman, there is no revolution without a cultural revolution.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
The one stand-up comedian that didn't turn into a reactionary.
Yet, there's always a possibility that the rate they're fucking going, but...
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. The failed Hollywood socialite to fascist pipeline is about 4 inches long. Only takes one bad tweet.
Yeah, one bad tweet or one failed script away from just being a fucking Nazi.
Yeah.
There go my convictions.
Yep.
So speaking of rhetoric, I know like a lot of kind of what we talk about on this panel, because like I'm a grad student, Greg is a grad student, Dr. Connor, Professor Q, is faculty. We kind of talk about a lot of sort of almost the presence and arguably the infiltration of conservative talking points, reactionary views within academic spheres. So sort of in your wheelhouse of rhetoric, has there really like been any of that? Like have you noticed any sort of far right entryism almost like into your academic spaces?
Yeah, so the first thing you need to know about my academic space, communication is so disparate. Like, there's people doing organizational communication, which is basically just telling business owners how to own their business better and communicate to their workers and that kind of stuff. A lot of nonprofit style things. There's social scientific work, the Likert scales and all that. And then there's like rhetoric, which is more like critical, kind of more like philosophy or like English than like communication sciences. The discipline. Yeah, exactly. But instead of reading like boring texts, we read boring speeches. So I think that my corner of that giant pie is pretty lefty and is also relatively resistant to like far right talking points. That being said, it does traffic in a lot of the right wing to liberal talking points that have the same function as right-wing talking points, such as McCarthyism, for instance, which remains a major issue in the field to the point where, I don't really publish or talk too much about communism, even though I think it's the solution to these issues. So really what goes on, and I guess the second thing that goes on, and this isn't like an infiltration so much as just an issue with the academy, is just like race neutral nonsense. Like thinking about the problem with Fuentes, for instance, in that he's being too rude. With, nobody's actually said that, but the measures that people use to determine whether or not a social media sphere is going to be prone to Nazism is like how many like bad words are being, and not even like N words, like fuck, or like fuck you, that was stupid, would get me on like the no list for somebody's study, and then the AI would say this person is probably going to become a Nazi. It's just like completely abstracted from material reality because
it's got no theory.
Yeah, right. And the theory that it does have is like, the most root positivism with absolutely no room for like historical analysis. It's so frustrating.
I mean, is it that like lazy to where they just arguably just outsource it to AI? Like, is it that like depraved of actual human input?
Not the rhetoric side. That would be more the social science. And there's a lot of like digital humanities stuff that is starting to crop up. So really what you've already heard and seen in terms of like our methods and our research becoming more efficient for the purpose of churning out as many publications as possible. I think that's part of it. I don't think that these AI digital algorithmic methods are all bad, but if you're using them to try to understand something as complicated and historical as fascism and racism, then you're using a robot. You're not going to understand really, again, the ethos and the pathos that's going on to make these arguments work for people. And then, of course, the left is going to fall in that too. Like Hassan would be a fascist, which I guess has a degree of truth to it. Under these algorithms, you know what I mean? It's just silly.
Yeah, like the ironic misogyny would get caught within that system.
Perhaps it should.
Yeah, hey, some people say.
I mean, it's a lot of like who defines what these labels are, right? Like Nazis and fascists and stuff. Like, I mean, I remember back in 2001 with the Afghanistan war when I was against it at the time, and I would have boomers calling me a terrorist because if I'm not for the war, then I'm a terrorist sympathizer, and if I'm a terrorist sympathizer, then you're no better than I'm no better than a terrorist. So they would call me a terrorist to my face. I'm just like, what in the world? And then I think it's just it's one of those things where I think that like politics is best organized, not with how you think that it should run, but how you would want the system to be run if your worst opponent was at the helm. You know what I mean? If it's super authoritarian, there's no checks on it, then as soon as the balance of power shifts, and then what happens? Then we have McCarthyism, we have all these the Red Scares, that kind of stuff, and I don't feel like that's progress at all. I feel like Trotsky, especially what he's talking about, is like a united working class, and reaching out to not like Nick Fuentes, but the people that actually think that this is somehow a good way to go forward, and it's being like, this isn't going towards the road that you think it's going on. This is a false prophet. This guy is leading you down the wrong path.
I would love to breach the de-radicalization conversation. It's not something that I've done any direct workings on, but of course it's in the sphere. And man, there's the difficulty with approaching that, neophyte of Nick Fuentes and trying to, lead him to the light, so to speak, is that, it's especially if you're coming at this from the perspective of building a united front, which is a sentiment that I completely agree with. In so doing, we can't keep out of purview the fact that some people have not antagonistically different interests, but non-antagonistically different interests within the front that allows them. Fuentes is the one that's telling them that they're antagonistic in nature, which is allowing them to come down this pipeline. But when we call them non-antagonistic, we can't forget that there is a degree of material interest involved, especially when you're talking about white nationalism. Like, these people legitimately think that their world would get better if they genocided all people of color out of existence. And obviously it would not, right? But under the paradigm of like white racism and the amount of relative social capital that we get by virtue of being white in that system, it's really, really easy to see it like you can. So you can't just be like, this guy is a bad guy and we're the good guys. You have to do such deep, intricate work, right, to get to the nuance. And that's why I have so much skepticism about the sort of, debating alt-right guy on Twitch style of politics, because this medium is literally not conducive in the slightest to the amount of care and attention and difficulty that conversation has.
But you'd be talking not to Fuentes, but you'd be talking to his audience, right? And I think that would be the goal, right? And like when I debated pause on the existence of DNA, like you can look at the search terms, and it's like, it's people that are looking for Haas's content that actually wind up watching it. And then, there's actually good response from his, followers or whatever that like, hey, this is actually really good. Like it was an interesting point. Like there's a good critique of his analysis and all that kind of stuff. And I felt like, I don't know. It just seems like when if there's an algorithm that exists and we understand that, and we know that it's driven by this like antagonistic force, then put some antagonistic stuff in their search terms and push our agenda or our de-radicalization ideals through this motive, like through this I don't know, this algorithm, like make it show up in their feeds too.
Yeah, so I think like what you're trying to speak to is almost like fight fire with fire. I think we touched on this earlier, like before you actually hopped in, Greg. Sort of that notion of like, if you're trying to engage, like on Twitch as a medium, for example, like if we're trying to engage with these people, like it's not necessarily conducive, I think, like you agreed, to change the mind of the figurehead, Fuentes or Haas or somebody else. And it's more about their audiences. I think the problem is a lot of the audiences are already coming in firmly on a side, and the amount of people who are hesitant and on the fence aren't necessarily as numerous as you think they are, simply because like it's about the spectacle and not necessarily about the nuance or the facts or anything like that. I'll give you another example, not with anybody prominent, but I had an anti-vaxxer last time I was streaming on Tuesday, and I was trying to talk to him. She'd be like, "Okay, cool. You say vaccines do this. All right, show me like where you found that, or like how do you know?" Like I was just asking honest to God questions. I was like, "All right, we can explore how you came to this position. Like that's I think a halfway decent conversation." And I couldn't even get that far. Like it's not about the nuance. It's not about the discussion. It's slapping talking points like spaghetti on a wall and seeing what sticks. It's about trying to rope other people in. It's about trying to sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt in something like vaccines. So as it pertains to like the interaction of big internet personalities, hell, you could use the Hassan Andrew Tate shit from earlier. Hassan went into that Discord call with the singular intent of just making Andrew Tate look like an ass clown, and I think he was pretty successful in doing that. Right? There was zero nuance to that debate. Andrew Tate wouldn't even talk to him about the questions he was asking. Like the Fortnite Zoomers were screaming at Hassan because they were making their parasocial daddy look dumb. So, it was not about nuance. It was not anything relating to like in-depth discussion. But I think, Greg, you speak to like a need for us to almost like propagandize. And I think that's something that Grumlow has mentioned a lot before, is like we have shitty propaganda. We have shitty agitprop. We don't make enough of it. And what we do make is not necessarily the best. It doesn't really help rope people in.
I think what we're missing, and it's with Andrew Tate, it's with Fuentes, all these guys. Like, what makes people go to that? What makes that ideology alluring? Why are they going and following these people? I mean, that's what we really need to get down to and try to figure out what can we do to show and highlight the road forward doesn't lead to where they're talking about that like women aren't property, and that's not going to give a better a better road forward for anyone, the entire civilization, if all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people, because I've honestly been watching because of this. I know that we have the talk coming up. I mean, I've been watching a lot of Fuentes, Jordan Peterson, all these guys. Like I'm trying to really get my head around like what makes this thing alluring. And I think that what makes these guys alluring is that it gives people like things that they can do and like roads forward. that really like the left doesn't really do. You know, these guys are, Jordan Peterson, like a great example. It's like really pragmatic, like just make your bed. It's like, whoa, like what, you know, and maybe that does help somebody, you know, so then they listen to something else that he says. And it's like another brick, you know, that he's going down that road. And, you know, they constantly celebrate wins. They constantly talk about how they're winning. They're going to win. This is why Trump always does it. We're winning. We're going to keep on winning. And, you know, on the left, it's kind of like doomer. It's a really like everything sucks. The whole system sucks. We hate America. We hate what's going on. You know, nothing's going good. As opposed to like, damn, dude, like we got like a renewable energy, hundreds of millions of dollars for renewable energy in the infrastructure bill. Like, oh, that's awesome. An executive order just came down from Biden that like things are happening, and then owning that shit, being like, hell yeah, that's the only reason Biden has done anything good is because our policies. He's passing our policies, and that's why he's had any progress whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one thing to be like, yeah, we could probably make the left, you know, less abyss gazing. You know, I think we've talked about that before, where, you know, if you just do nothing but lean into how shitty everything is, then you're just gonna come off as sad and depressed. And I think Hassan has actually said a couple of times on stream, like, you know, you're a leftist when like everything stops being fun, because you see things for how, you know, rotten and corrupt they are insofar as how our, you know, economy is organized and how a lot of our institutions function. But like in that, it's also a fundamental recognition that like the entire game is rigged against us. The CIA will go, you know, coup everybody in South America who even thinks about doing a leftism, you know, anything like that. Like it also is a recognition that like it's an uphill battle, and that's I think what made Bernie's campaign so, you know, inspiring and revolutionary, is because he kind of took that recognition and he turned it into something positive, like, hey, like good things are possible, change is possible, we can actually achieve some of these mildly social democratic policies, which is like insane for America because we love just like killing the homeless for sport. But like that idea that like, hey, we can actually do some of these things, we have tangible solutions like you described, you know, we have renewable energy solutions, or we have all these cool vaccines so people don't get preventable illness and die. Like it goes back to that notion of we can just, you know, propagandize better. And that goes back to, I think, you know, what Reed really excels at is, you know, rhetoric. Like let's turn this into a question, you know, how do we take a lot of what we see as leftists and actually, you know, propagandize off it? Like what kind of rhetoric can we use to sort of avoid that, like, I hate America, KKK, everything sucks type rhetoric, while also being able to point out like, hey, look, shit's fucked. Here's what we got to do about it. Like what in your experience kind of works to achieve that goal?
So I think that the most important first thing is meeting people where they are, which requires just a really, really crucial attention to context. And ultimately, I think it's best done face-to-face, mano a mano, in person. There's just, especially when you're dealing with something like fascism, which from my perspective is mostly an emotional appeal, it's just so difficult to reach somebody, particularly somebody who's been, you know, like drinking the sauce for quite some time, without having that emotional connection that in many ways these ideologues are giving them that they lack in their otherwise life. And who can blame them? We live in a deeply, deeply antisocial state of affairs. And then the second part, I think, is making a community around us that actually supplants some of those antisocial conditions and makes them more hospitable and ultimately revolutionary. I think that's what the United Front is really about. You know, propaganda, I find, as a means to this, as an end. You know, it's about helping people recognize that, you know, even in the most authoritarian of conditions, ultimately all political power is from the people. And you are a part of those people. And what you need to do in order to exercise that power is to, at least in certain contexts, not recognizing the state as having a monopoly on the ability to make that world, not allowing Amazon or Twitter or Twitch, for instance, to have the monopoly on creating a digital world, for instance, and, actually going out and making that happen in whatever way it needs to be done. For instance, in Pittsburgh, I found that tenant rights are a really, really critical battleground where people can really make those connections across difference. Because, you might be really far to the right of me. You may think that I'm terrible for being a trans or whatever, but ultimately you need a place to live and I need a place to live. And we can work together in order to get ourselves a place to live. And that'll be friction, especially for people who are involved that, might get exposed to rhetorics that, demean their personage. For instance, if I organize with a transphobic person, that's going to suck for me, right? And I don't think that there's some sort of moralistic imperative for people to do that. But, ultimately, that's how it happens, right? That's how people, change their minds. I forget somebody who said it, but the right, when the left says, it's not my job to teach you. The right says, here's my reading list. We're going to be talking about this on Discord. You're welcome to join us. And, I'm a teacher by trade, so I have never said it is not my job to teach you ever before, right? Right. We need to recognize that it's our job collectively to have a healthy community. And part of that involves stepping in where we can and doing that educational work if need be.
Dude, the idea
one of the
of
things that,
go ahead, dude. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, one of the things I impress upon my chat is that it's not your job to go out of your way to try and educate people, but it is your job at every given opportunity where someone is approaching you in good faith to take that opportunity to grow alongside that person, because you're gonna learn something from those, your reactionary uncle who's drunk at Thanksgiving. You're going to learn something, not only in your rhetoric is going to develop, but you're going to learn something about the kind of conditioning that people are subjected to that brought them to that kind of worldview. So, it's not your job to go out of your way, but you should take that upon yourself when you can.
It's I don't see it as your job. I see the fact that people view this as a question of having a job to do something and expecting compensation versus not, as being just so deeply, deeply troubling. It's not your job, but it is your moral imperative to do so, I think. And as it turns out, if we're going to be even anything being anti-capitalist, then what we do, the labors that we put out in the world, are not always going to be compensated. That's arguably a good thing.
Yeah. But I mean, in the Always Anti-Fascist article, you're looking at all of these posters. You have all of these, the wanted Henry Kissinger, stuff, trying to talk about the problems that he's had. Just imagine if what if that person didn't do that poster and was just what, if these people don't know about these crimes against humanity in Vietnam, Cambodia, all these things, then screw them. It's this weird, terms of service politics where it's you've got to do the reading before you can agree, and it's a weird, I don't know, man. I've always seen leftist politics as the basis for it. And getting back to your question, Marcus, kind of what can we talk about? Compassion, man. Compassion and empathy, and these people being exploited, and their labor is being stolen from them. They're being massively exploited in order to think that Fuentes is anything other than a charlatan. How crazy of a worldview that can be. And it's not I don't know, man. It's just it seems like a lot of the gatekeeping doesn't align with this compassion based politics that I always thought universal healthcare was striving for, right? So you can't be I'm going to have universal healthcare, but then at the same time, I'm going to take your job away from you for thinking bad thoughts. You know what I mean? It's kind of the person that's on the fence there, that's seeing that person that's being canceled, or maybe they didn't even agree with them. Maybe they didn't even agree that there was a good point or something. But then they're well, why is this person being canceled for saying that? I think that may be a good question or something. And then that radicalized that person that's on the fence. So I feel it's about bringing people in together as opposed to gatekeeping and purity testing, in my opinion.
Well, there was a good video we watched today in kind of remembering the passing of Michael Brooks, where he was talking with Cornel West at an open forum about the two sides of MLK, the compassionate socialistic side, the love and empathy, and then the Machiavellian side of Martin Luther King, who had a vision of power, but did not detach that from the empathy and the love that his worldview wanted to see. And that, I think, is where a lot of socially leftist people and organizers kind of lose sight. They either have a vision of power and see what it is that we want to achieve, but they lack that empathy and that love that we should be offering to people. That space, that welcoming, big tent politics. I like your term, Greg, of terms of service politics. I like. I'm probably going to use that in the future. It's good. Brand that one if you can.
You own
I
51%
like that example.
of this company.
Yeah,
all open source, baby.
Yeah. It's we're doing take sharing over here. There is a distinct lack of empathy. I think because if you're a leftist, you're used to losing. So one less soldier in your fight isn't that big of a deal when you have none. And the lack of clarity in what is it that we are trying to achieve, other than brownie points on social media for having a good take, getting a couple quote tweets, or maybe even having propaganda that you've made, get shared around. What is it that we want? What we want is the abolition of capitalism if we're anti-capitalist. We want no more fascism if we're anti-fascist, and we want an end to the conditions that bring about racism if we're anti-racist. So what does that look like, and how do we get there? And for a lot of leftists, that question is still unanswered.
Mm-hmm. That's where I think the United Front needs to come into play, because that's where you can see power getting built on, the levels that are immediately available. If you have, 5 homies, then you can do a lot with 5 homies. You can't kick every fascist in the booty hole with 5 homies, but you can probably go and make the world that you live in a bit more hospitable. You can take their flyers down, for instance. We got whole bunch of crews in Pittsburgh taking down Patriot Front stuff. Those are our demons up here. You can, in other contexts, you can reduce the likelihood that people would fall into those conditions that allow them to fall prey to fascist ideologues, like joining a union, joining tenant justice organizations, in certain contexts, especially right now, joining up and volunteering for abortion clinics, who are groups of people that are needing a whole lot of help right now. You can do things that change the world that allows these conditions to exist. You can't just, if you reduce everything to just piecemeal, we need to solve everything instantly, then the left is going to keep losing, because those aren't realistic goals. They aren't goals at all. They're just aspirations.
For real. Yeah, I think it's good to talk about utopians, utopia, because it's where's your politics kind of leading? What's your end goal here? Because it's I feel especially if you talk to libertarian right wing people, where it's living back into caves, you're like, whoa, Jesus, chill.
Yeah. You're we want lords. And we want kingdoms.
Literally,
we want serfdoms. So you want feudalism? No, not that.
Exactly. Yeah, the live on site Amazon indentured servitude model, where you're like, what is going on? But I feel like there is a weird thing that happens. And Grandma, I think I like how you put that too, man. Where it's people are so used to losing that they're just what's another battle kind of thing, and it's I swear if you reanimated Lenin's corpse and he had 100 million people marching on Washington, you'd still have people being like, dude's a fucking lib, dude. Doesn't have third worldism built into his model. Duh. It's
oh God. Yeah. Listen, I'm all for the United Front, but with the exclusion of tankies. Okay? That's where my partisanship comes in. No tankies in the guard.
Honestly, I'm going to be real. I'm pro tanky. I'm not tanky personally, but I think they belong, at least in provisional base. At least my experience in Pittsburgh is that the ones who are going to stroll up to the Democrats who are taking over the protest and tell them, hey, you're co-opting this protest, are 2 groups of people, neither of whom I belong to, the anarchists and the tankies. And for that, they get my respect.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's one of those things where, it's an interesting umbrella thing where you're kind of talking about, super authoritarian with tankies, or basically authoritarian communists is basically what we're talking about, or versus more of a libertarian socialist, kind of not more democratic, less authoritarian. And in either of those cases, I feel like there's something to be learned from those, that thing where people that are more hardline Marxists, it's kind of like it's an interesting critique on, how far does imperialism infect our education, our way of life, what's happening, and on the right, I feel like it's just how on the sliding scale, how good are you with like a white ethno state kind of thing, where it gets really into like whoa, that's really exile-y, and I don't know, it doesn't seem like anyone's material condition is improving there.
How much do you enjoy murder, and who would you like to murder?
So maybe I'll ease up on the tankies and recognize that they'll ease into more realistic politics approaches after they graduate high school.
There you go.
Once they learn that imperialism also means that they don't know very much about socialism. And as it turns out, the Soviet Union is not the only example thereof.
Yeah. Oh, God. No, there's we're going to upset Chad again by talking about tankies because anyway. Not going to get into it again. I think there is very much a spice that online politics enjoyers have to them, where if you meet an anarchist online, they're so annoying. Oh my God, anarchists online are so annoying. But when you meet an anarchist in real life, they're doing food pantries. They're organizing public libraries. They're doing the real work. They're doing the Lord's work out here. It's that the kind of anonymity that lends itself to more extremist rhetoric online. They lose themselves in that kind of caricature of themselves that they present online.
Crust posting, as it were.
1,000%, dude. Because you talk to like people that I meet, or like you talk to an anarchist, and they'll say 1,000 different ways of all of the anarchists in the 20th century that had huge impacts on the civil rights movements, on the way that unions were formed, about ending childhood labor, all that kind of stuff. They'll talk your fucking ear off on that stuff. But then you like meet some anarchists and they're just like, well, I would never touch a ballot box or get involved at all because this isn't my system, and getting involved supports that system. And it's like, damn, dude, like you're either going to be Eugene Debs or you're going to be Bernie Sanders, man, at the end of the day. And Bernie, I think that Bernie Sanders had a way bigger impact. And Eugene Debs, obviously, with the rise of unions and all that kind of stuff, he had an integral role and he had a big part. But like, I mean, can you really argue that Eugene Debs had a bigger impact on our politics than Bernie Sanders, who I think is probably the most influential politician of our generation?
I would say that they are two influential leftist, socialist public figures that are incomparable because of the conditions of their time. Eugene Debs' 6 runs for office led to the New Deal. What has Bernie Sanders' 2 runs for office done? That's yet to be seen. We can kind of look in the last 6 years and see, well, the leftist labor movement in the U.S. has grown exponentially. An organization like the DSA had 30,000 members in 2012. It's got well over 150,000 members now, quadrupled in size. And there's an openly anti-capitalist movement in the U.S. in ways that we haven't seen since, the 1930s. Pretty good. I just don't, we haven't seen the material benefits of Bernie Sanders, I guess is what I'm saying. We haven't seen any material benefit yet. Time
will tell. I mean, we did get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez getting arrested, which is, I believe a direct effect of Bernie Sanders having existed. And
absolutely.
Speaking of optics, that's going to get all the people on board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as Chad mentioned, Bernie reviving the American left is noteworthy in and of itself. I mean, obviously, we want to see material change come down the line, but
and
to get there, you have to get people like involved, and that's been Bernie's like primary role as sort of the living, breathing clarion call to do just that.
Yeah, I mean, Chad knows where I stand on Bernie. I literally have him on my ring. Like,
beautiful.
I love that.
Thank you. I mean, I always keep him with me.
my point, I guess, is like a more like Bernie's very pragmatic, I guess, is my larger point, where he's like getting involved at the local level as mayor first, and obviously the legislature later. I think that it's a way. I think Bernie's runs for office, people get it wrong that like, and I was a victory captain for him, like in his run. Bernie was my favorite House of Representatives congressman before he was my favorite senator. I love the guy. He's like very inspirational. Him just going up there by himself, casting all those votes all by himself to an empty place, empty room, because he felt like that was necessary. And I felt that way too, like speaking up and being the lone voice, trying to vote no against stuff for, whether it was, city hall or graduate students, city politics, student politics and stuff like that. And not to compare the two to Bernie Sanders, but what he's doing it's inspirational, I think, in what his message was. And I think that it's not really, it's up to us. It's up to the people. It's the millions of people all across the nation that are getting involved at the local level and stuff. And I think that is the legacy of Bernie Sanders, that it's not necessarily like a single piece of legislation that he's gotten passed, even though he's the chair of the budget committee right now. But my larger point is that it's kind of like inspiring a new wave of people to getting involved, hopefully for the first time. I think that we'll have to see,
Well, to kind of bring it back to the Fuentes thing, I'm sorry to cut you off, Marcus. What the right does have a lot of is bannermen. There are a lot of people who hold the flags of their movement, and they have a big tent. They take all comers who are curious. They'll red pill you, as they say.
All comers who are curious, indeed.
They're all degenerates at the end of the day. We on the left have a handful of representatives. How does the kind of mythologizing of these strong men within this kind of Fuentes space play out that you've seen in your research?
Yeah. Oh, man. It goes back to the ethos question, really. So what it does on the right in particular that I think is quite distinct from the left, we are, at least those of us who I think are serious about being on the left are collectivists, So the notion that we're trying to perfect ourselves as individuals through the movement should at least be anathema to how we go about organizing. Not always is, hence the tankies, but, very often, that shouldn't be the case. On the right, it's pretty much the opposite. They see themselves as perfecting themselves through their movement. And so these bannermen kind of give them a notion of this is who I can be. Fuentes often brands himself as the most canceled man in America. There's a lot of different people who do that as well.
More like the most who omega lol man in America.
Literally who Maggie's as hell. But that's something that these people can appeal to. The notion that, I stood up to the agenda that's trying to kill me and my race and whatever. I'm the guy that was able to do that. I do it uncompromisingly. I do it without being triggered. I do it without any of the softness or malleability that we would associate with an imperfect feminine person, right? So I think that bannermen play a more important role for the right because pretty much one of the basic reasons why people get persuaded into, this sphere is trying to perfect themselves and, by extension, perfect the nation. Hence, we get like homesteading, for example, as a version of right-wing activism. If we perfect the family at this microscopic level, then that will be the production of the nation. And obviously, for those of us on the left who think that material conditions shape individuals and not the other way around, that's crazy to us. Mm-hmm. And so that's not to say we don't have bannermen. We certainly do, because we all live in a society and tend to fall prey to individualizing ideology because it is neoliberal. So we have those as well, but I think they are more parasitic on the movement in a lot of ways. And that applies to Bernie as well to some extent. I think that, overall Bernie is a net positive. I think primarily Bernie is a product of his time, a time in which there needed to be a resurgence of the left. But I think at the end of the day, for the movement to really develop to where it needs to go, are the way that we identify with ourselves as a movement cannot be in these like lofty national figureheads. We have to identify with our community, with the people that we're trying to make the world with. That's where we need to go.
Well said.
Yeah, so I actually I think have a couple of questions that are more, I guess, like meta in a way, because when Professor Q mentioned that like you were an academic, like formally doing research on this, I guess my first question of like how much of your, like I think you mentioned you were in a combined like master's PhD program. Is all of this like far right Nick Fuentes specific research? Like, is this your actual dissertation work?
This is a part of it. My broader dissertation, it's much more like, it isn't just Fuentes and Cozy and that sort of sphere. I'm much more interested in how they've developed over a particular set period of time. So the way I'm getting around like the dissertation to book period being really, really long is framing my dissertation as a historical project in which the time of the history is right now, so that it will be history by the time I publish it, essentially.
Whoa.
I got that advice at a conference and my brain exploded instantly. But that's what I'm trying to do, is see how these movements evolved over a period of about 15 years, from around the Tea Party period through Trump's election and now this like post-Trump COVID period. So, but yes, Fuentes is going to be a big part of it, and the Cozy stuff is a big part of it. But I'm more interested in like how these scenes have developed across subcultures. So one of the chapters is on like live stream debate culture, from internet blood sports through to like the Medicare era and inwards into what we have today, this sort of balkanized debate period, maybe. Another one is going to be about a specific platform. I'm not sure yet because I haven't finished coursework. But once we get there, it'll be about a specific platform, how that platform is still on the internet, despite the fact that it, violates every single Cloudflare term of service ever, the infrastructure of the stuff. So I'm not just watching content. I think that that's a very sort of, it's a very starved way to conduct this research, because that content only matters insofar as there's an audience to consume it, a platform to have it on. So I try to look at the whole infrastructure.
So then, like, how did you convince like advisors or committee members, like faculty, like how did you convince them to let you do this? Because from my perspective, like such a notion would be considered like, what the fuck are you doing? How many drugs did you do before coming to campus to propose such a ludicrous idea? Get out. So when I heard that's what you did, I was like, how did they let him do that? Like, that's, yeah. I mean, I like it. Like, that's good. But I'm just like, damn, that's the first I've ever really heard that, like, properly manifest.
Actually, my advisor does conservative populism in the U.S. So he doesn't go like, he doesn't go like deep, he's not on the dark web, he's not, in telegrams or anything like that. He's looking at more
like old guard stuff then.
Yeah, his work is like, his recent book, I the People by Paul Johnson, is expands from the 60s through to the Tea Party and some into the like Obama era.
Until you're online.
Oh yeah, I've been around the block. But basically, because they sympathize with the notion. One of the other members of my committee has an article on the sovereign citizen movement. So really, there's a great turn in rhetoric, particularly rhetoric.
Okay, I need to make it out to Pittsburgh now to hang out with you people. They're like, my God.
I would recommend coming in the summer. You don't want to be here in the winter.
I mean, any time I can talk about like sovereign citizens and like right-wing radicalization and Tea Party stuff, that's a good time for me.
Come on through. Pittsburgh is weird.
That's what you're known for, right? Or is that Austin?
That's Austin, but they're not weird anymore. They're gentrified as all hell.
Okay.
We have reclaimed the weird title.
Okay.
Yeah, there always seems to be like a running competition. Like Portland, Oregon seems to like usually take the top spot, but I don't know. These days it seems like they're too busy like counter protesting Portland police and Ted Wheeler. So, somebody else can have it for once. I'm totally okay with that.
There you go.
Yeah. So like, insofar like obviously, I think what you mentioned, like your current advisor was sort of already doing a little bit of this work, less terminally online flavored, but still ultimately kind of, peering into that very specific abyss of a conservative populist rhetoric.
Yes.
And, figureheads within it. So like, what was that conversation like between you and your advisor? It's like, hey, I want to like look into like weird online spaces and like lift up floorboards and see what cockroaches are there. Like, how did that go about? Like, what did that conversation sound like?
He's like, cool, man, let's do it. Partially because, there'd been precedent at the school and also precedent in the field. My good friend Iche Brolu writes about like white nationalist memes on 4chan, like the Happy Merchant, for instance, and how that works sort of on the level of affect and emotion and all that stuff. So really, like, it sounds like a just absolutely absurd, investment for one to make as an early career scholar to be doing this absurd research, but it's actually quite not an uncommon field of study in rhetoric, like online weird stuff, because people are starting to realize that this is a, infrastructural problem. Like, it got elected to the White House, like at that point, even people who know absolutely like what is a Kiwi farm, the hacker known as 4chan type of people are going to start looking at this and saying that there's an issue and it needs to be studied, and that the level of persuasion is a good a place to start as any of them.
Huh, interesting. I don't know. I think I mentioned this earlier, like from the vaccine biology perspective. Like, I really wish there was more of that attitude in our spaces, and I think Greg, you could probably echo this sentiment, simply because Greg and I are kind of like, ooh, like this conspiracy theorist, like he believes they're putting vaccines in salad dressing. Like, let's figure out how he got to that point. Like that's wild. But like, if we were to tell our advisors, like, yeah, in our spare time we're looking at how people think there's like chemtrails and the virus spreads by 5G towers, and they would look at us like, what the fuck are you doing? Just get back into the lab and stop looking at that nonsense. Yeah. So like, I guess to me, all of this to say, it's really endearing, and I think almost like optimistic to see that informal academic spaces there's at least some material interest in actually looking at this stuff. I would hope that like maybe in the future the social sciences aspect of it could be more, I guess, like interdisciplinary or collaborative with, the STEM lords, the hard sciences, so to speak. Oh God, I use that term so often, but like literally one of my like favorite vaccine scientists, like I was just trying to like share data with him on Twitter yesterday. I was like, oh, like, hey, like here's this cool vaccine that I like that might be happening soon. Like, what do you think? And he was just being a fucking debate lord. It was like, dude, like I'm not arguing with you. Like, we're on the same side. Stop trying to like own me here. We're just talking about data. Like, what the fuck, man? We're both nerds. Like, leave it alone. But I think like that collaboration with like the social sciences end would help them realize like there is a world beyond your laboratory and beyond all of this nitpicky data that you should pay attention to, because it doesn't matter how fucking cool your work is. If they think that they being the American populace think that the government or the globalists are weaponizing what you do, and it doesn't matter. None of what you do actually matters. They're just going to discard it and say it's part of the globalist agenda and move on. So yeah, I guess that was less of a question and more just like a sentiment. Like, it's good to see this happening.
4 cheers for interdisciplinarity. Like, I don't know how to refute like race genetics, for instance. I don't have that knowledge, all of that. It goes just on a basic level over my head in terms of my knowledge of the human genome. That's stuff that interdisciplinary work needs to be done on in order to have a fighting chance in this argumentative scene, when they can just pull up things that look like science and lodge them at 12-year-olds, which turns out to be a very persuasive rhetorical tactic. And exactly as you say, on the other hand, your studies are great and all, but if they can't be communicated to an audience of people that then receives them and accepts the person that's delivering them as a trustworthy source of information, then we get to where we're at today.
Well, actually, it's interesting you bring up race genetics. I still need to probably confirm this, but another grad student who actually just got his Ph.D., so I shouldn't really call him a grad student anymore. Newly minted doctor Kevin Bird will be a guest sometime in August, but he's like one of the leading leftist scientists who basically pisses off the God saw Jordan Peterson-esque types on Twitter. Like, that's what he did as a side hustle, was just annoy them to the point where he's got like an actual internet following of academics who are like training each other on how to counteract like race science messaging, how to say, oh, you can't misuse that technique, or these people are using science to like appeal to like the Nick Fuentes types and make 1350 memes and shit like that. So like all of that to say, that's a little bit, again, another shameless plug, but like that's kind of what we want to do with this little experiment, so to speak, is try and get that like cross-disciplinary input in, so we can like bring on other academics, or help chat know like, okay, if you see this shit, it's a race scientist trying to be a bigot, or if you see these kinds of rhetoric coming from groypers, like this is what they're up to, this is what they're trying to do. So all that to say, like, if you want to chat, and anybody who comes across this, to remember one thing from either this discussion or like anything as it pertains to your work, what would that be?
Man,
I know that's a bit of a loaded one. It might require some thought, but
yeah, no, that's a good one. I think for now this might change for what it's worth absolutely nothing if it changes after now. But for now, my answer to that will be that no reactionary movement has ever existed in a vacuum. The word reactionary implies a relation. It's reacting to something. That means that what people are reacting to is the inevitability of struggle. And indeed, I'm a revolutionary optimist, the inevitability that we will win, even if it's not in our lifetime. Ultimately, they win because they cope. We win because we are right. And the only basis on which you should ever be having a conversation with any of these chuds is to forcefully make them believe that. That would be my take.
God damn.
Yeah, that's very based, actually. I think where I was having that exact discussion with some other folks, like behind the scenes in Discord, like no panelists, but some other like Twitch users. Reading rap for those who know who he is, but like that exactly, like it I think it's time to sort of abstract ourselves from like the good faith free marketplace of ideas shit, because a lot of people are not acting in good faith. It's time to actually defend data and good things for what they are.
Exactly. And be unapologetic about that. Like, no more backstepping or worrying that we're going to, say the wrong thing, frankly, and certainly no appealing to the people who have antagonistic interests to ours. We are all that we need to win.
And damn.
Yeah. That's
Spitting hot fire.
Gremlo or Greg, do you have any other questions or stray thoughts?
I'm just gonna say this. This has been one of my top 5 favorite episodes of Ministry of Science that we've done.
Big agree.
Yeah, top tier. Very good. Stunning. Damn.
That really does mean a lot. It's my first time in the live stream personally.
Really?
Yeah, I've never done this, and I really do want to like do stuff like this and be more public about the things. So that was all I'll say. Thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Oh no, you're welcome.
If you want to, like, I would say the door's open. If you want to be, a panelist or make a recurring appearance, like, absolutely. Because if you didn't tell us that this was like your first live stream appearance, we would have no idea. Honestly, like, very, I think, well spoken, scholarly. Like, that's ultimately kind of what we want to do. We want to, elevate the level of discourse beyond just shouting talking points at each other. And you certainly fit that bill.
Listen, all you like, you've got the rhetoric down. You've got like the speaking ability. All you need is some bisexual lighting, a decent camera, a mic that cuts in and out, and you're like there. You're in left Twitch.
Hey, I got the bisexuality. Let me grab the lighting,
Yeah,
maybe
there
a
you go.
room divider, and then we'll be good to go.
Perfect.
And actually, Gremlo, you just reminded me, because I think we talked about this in private, and we could probably loop in Maddie on this too, because I know she was having some pinings to do this. But if we have a literal debate coach, like an academic debate coach, we could have less shitty, less blood sport debates on this panel, like actually research topics with academic framing and guardrails, so to speak, to give a nice contrast to I'm going to repeat this talking point and shout it at you until the chat has their ears bleed because 3 people are shouting over each other at the same time.
Oh my god, I could be the dummy chud.
Oh, and actually, speaking of that too, Gremlo, sorry not to go on like a tangent, But we were connecting, like Reed Rap and we came up with this idea. I don't know if you know who Del Maximum is, but I think is like he's a Twitch streamer, but I think he has some like acting training. So we were going to actually have him like do what we talked about before with like academics entering into like hostile interviews and conversations, and have him be like the hostile chud in like a variety of contexts. I'm thinking like we could take our panelists and just like have him act out a bunch of different shit to like practice our rhetoric to see like
what would
work, what doesn't.
Brilliant.
So I know that's in the pipeline for sure. But we could certainly mix and match that with debate style content with the academic framing. So all that to say, Reed, like if you want to do this more often, we can loop you into our Discord where we sort of organize this behind the scenes. And depending on topic or guest, you can show up if you'd like. If you want to show up every time, more than welcome to do that. Kind of your call.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Here, I will email you my Discord because I'm actually seriously interested in being able to like do more debate stuff. Yeah, I'd love to lend a hand, think, talk, all that stuff.
Yeah, because I think, Greg, this would satiate sort of your desire to like actually like get into the midst of having these conversations without like needing some like crazy Fuentes motherfucker in the room. Like if we encounter these people in the wild like Pokemon, like how do we talk to them?
Right. And I think role playing is a like really important like learning tool for this type of stuff. It's infinitely better than platforming them. You can use it to double and make fun of them, and you figure out how to dispute them in the wild. It's great.
Sweet. So I think we can certainly work on that behind the scenes to develop the role play episodes. I think this is probably, Greg, unless you have any other thoughts or questions, we could go to what chat has been wanting to ask the panel.
I'm good. I got my question out. Thank you, though. I got like I have an excerpt from Trotsky's on fascism thing, which is kind of like an interesting thing to, but that's, I don't know. I can read it later or at a different time. It's just an interesting idea.
Okay, well, you got me curious now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no,
shoot. Okay, sorry. Sorry.
You're building us up, man.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get the questions ready in the background while you go through that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so here, let me link this in Marcus's chat just so people have an idea. Where's chat arena?
Reed, what's your favorite Twitch emote?
My favorite Twitch emote, honestly, classic. I just like Pog, like it's such a vibe.
Such a vibe.
Pog is pretty good. My favorite is still Dankies, the little peepo that like hops around. I love him.
Okay, so this is Trotsky, and giving like some context. This is him being called a social fascist and being pushed out. And social fascist is kind of like the idea that you're aligning or trying to create a broader workers movement, and there's other people that are trying to. I'm just trying to give, because he's going to use this word, so I'm trying to give some context. But here's Trotsky, quote, "If the Communist Party, in spite of the exceptionally favorable circumstances," because remember there was a workers kind of like revolution in a lot of these fascist nations earlier, and it seems to be that when the workers rise up, the kind of like the fascism kind of is the next wave kind of thing. Exceptionally favorable circumstances has proved powerless seriously to shake the structure of the social democracy with the aid of the formula of quote unquote social fascism, which is like kind of label frogging as kids say nowadays. Then real fascism now threatens this structure, no longer with the wordy formula of so-called radicalism, but with the chemical formulas of explosives. The policy of a united front of the workers against fascism flows from this situation. It opens up tremendous possibilities to the Communist Party. A condition for success, however, is the rejection of the theory and practice of quote unquote social fascism, the harm of which becomes a positive measure under the present circumstances. The social crisis will inevitably produce deep cleavages within the social democracy. The radicalization of the masses will affect the Social Democrats. We will inevitably have to make agreements with various social democratic organizations and factions against fascism, putting definite conditions in this connection to the leaders before the eyes of the masses. We must return from the empty official phrase about the United Front to the policy of the United Front as it was formulated by Lenin and always applied by the Bolsheviks in 1917. Thoughts?
I really like this Trotskyist arc that you're embarking on. I'm here for it, dude.
Dude, we are literally like one bad day away from Posadist Greg.
Good thing they shut down Posada bot.
Beam me up, Scotty.
Hell yeah. No, Trotsky's awesome. In a lot of his early writings, social fascism, as Trotsky puts it, as opposed to like Lenin's early, he didn't write too much on it. It was more of like a product of his passing, but he talked about like the kind of class antagonisms and the ways that right-wing movements try to co-opt Bolshevik movements. But his Trotsky's early writings are really concise in that he immediately saw what was happening in the transition of power before he was, sent to Argentina. So yeah, that you're on the Trotsky arc is very good.
I've read that thing like I first read it in 2015 when I kind of saw Trump getting like elected and the Republicans and stuff, and I've read it like 3 times since, and it's like every time that those essays just like hit home a little bit more around damn, like every sentence just kind of hits a little bit differently.
There really is something to theory of fascism that was being written during like the World War II period. Like it just hits different. There's the exigence of it, the urgency that they're writing. It's just alive the way you read it.
So before we move on to the chat questions, 20 years goes by, Reed. We're in post whatever we want to call this movement right now, the neo-Christo-fascist movement. What do you think your field is going to be writing about this moment?
Man, I think that whatever it will be quite a bit poorer in quality just because of the publication mill reducing the quality of everything. But I think that something that we will remember this by is the pandemic. Whether it should be remembered by the pandemic or not, I think that the conditions of stratification that the pandemic exacerbates are just so, pernicious, not only on the level of just how wage labor has become, but also just how social relations have become. And whether we look back at that as an anomaly that was corrected in time or as before it got really bad depends only on how quickly we win.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, it's actually a really good time you mentioned the paper mill discussion. We were just having this discussion, not in our ministry Discord, but in my specific one, about how to fix that problem, sort of the open access versus, I shouldn't say open access. It was like open access versus like other ideas because you still got to pay for open access publishing when you're the researchers, the academics, which is still like the central barrier with accessibility being an important one, but ultimately secondary because it just comes after chronologically. But like the fact that like you got a really good question from Grumlow and like you were thinking about it through that lens of like, well, the publishing system in terms of information dissemination is so fucked up. It's hard to answer that question. Like, God damn, I hate that problem so much in particular because it's so stifling. But I would agree with your answer for sure.
It's heartbreaking because there's just so many ways that it can be made better in like 3 minutes or less. So long as we didn't have, absurd monopolies on the means of information. So
actually, let me ask you this since I just kind of brought it up. How do you feel about nationalizing journals? like everything was just owned by the government. It was broken up by subject matter, no impact factors. Just if you wanted to publish something in sociology, maybe that got broken down into various like subcategories, sure, and that would be agreed upon by professional associations. But like instead of just trying to find some journal that is trying to like get your publishing money, you don't have to pay, and taxes take care of the overhead, so there's no profit incentive. How do you feel about that idea?
So I'm generally like warmly favorable to it, but there's, I think, some major hangups. The first is like, so depending on whether it would have peer review, I think that this goes in pretty different directions. If it doesn't have peer review, then the info overload question, of course. If it does have peer review, then I think that, government sponsored peer review, I think that there's a lot of ways that that's going to end up making, a much more chilling effect than we have in our current state of affairs, at least in the humanistic side, where at least I found if you know where to look, it's pretty easy to publish some pretty radical shit.
That's a fair point.
There's that. And that's pretty much it. Otherwise, I'd be relatively in favor of it, but under a better government would be even better. Naturally.
I mean,
go ahead, Greg.
I think it would be an interesting idea. Just the idea of like having it matters where they are, and they're organized in the government. I could see, especially after the CDC kind of being cut off and their legs chopped off behind below them, or maybe them not being as overt and public as they should have been. Like, I would just worry about the ability to publish things, for climate change research, for example. And if, a Republican that got into president that didn't want that stuff to be out there, kind of like what you see at the state level, right? Where you have like North Carolina, where it's like you can't even mention climate change in their legislation now.
The way I saw it was like, we're just graduating a surplus of PhDs, and if we were able to like pay them living wages to be career reviewers in their respective fields, that would be a nice like way to siphon the excess into something productive and meaningful, so that way everybody's not trying to cram into the door like it's the fucking station nightclub fire, trying to find a tenure track position in academia, because that's literally what it is. Because if you don't get through the door, you're fucking dead.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's kind of like what a program manager is, right? They're like going through and they're trying to figure out the best research and stuff and the proposals to fund the best research and that kind of stuff. But it's just not, I mean, it's this weird paradigm where it's like the publish or perish idea, where it's like we have to publish in order to get a thesis out and in order to become tenure. So you'd really need to have like the tenure track kind of changed and honestly incentivize outreach more. I was talking to a professor, and it's just like outreach is literally on the bottom rung of what you need to do in order to become a tenure track professor, and that's kind of the problem, right? Where you don't have people in the space and doing research, also doing science communication, but then they kind of argue that like, hey man, I'm good at like research, why would I be good at science communication too? And that is kind of what we see, where it's like, some people aren't good at kind of like talking to people about their research when they try, but they're good at like presenting to scientific conferences. So to ask one person to be all those things is kind of tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's a training thing. Depending on how big the surplus is, you could just siphon some people one way and siphon some people another. What is it? From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. We can almost sort of apply that.
A wise man once said.
Yeah, literally. If people are skilled in doing like the communication and the outreach, we should give them living wages so they can do it. Because if they're good at it, we want to take advantage of that.
Yeah, the union of peer-reviewed people. The peer
kind of like a ministry of science.
That's perhaps a good idea. I mean, has to be some way of like giving and compensating people for their time, and maybe there could be like legislation to at least do that for the U.S. based journals or something, where it's like those people are considered employees of the journals and they have to give them a fair wage, because like right now it's given to the professors, they do it for free allegedly, but then they also pawn it off to the grad students and postdocs in the lab who actually do the peer review, and then It's just it's just a mess, man. It's so important to the whole process. I really feel like peer review. No offense, I mean, pun intended with my YouTube channel name, but it is probably, I think, one of the most important processes of the scientific process.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We could probably, just to get to the chat questions, just because I don't know how Reed's doing on time, but like, yes, we should talk about that more in Discord, Greg, for sure. All right, so I collected a couple. The first one that I saw asked that like wasn't immediately answered thereafter was this, I guess, question directed specifically at Reed. The question was, within, I guess, the online spaces, I don't know if this is necessarily Fuentes or if it's anyone else, but, is there any particular corner or, floorboard you would like everybody to look under more? And if there is one, like, why does it interest you, or why do you think other people should be paying more attention to that specific space?
That is a great question. I think that I would say this is a bit of a vague answer, but we need to look more carefully at places that appear entirely apolitical. So Gamergate, for example, emerges out of video game culture, a very, self-consciously apolitical space, at least it was at that time and in certain contexts. And maybe one of the most underappreciated sources of that apolitical, just font of eventually political energy is like the atheist community on the internet.
Thank you.
R atheism, like the amazing atheists.
R/atheism, yeah. Militant atheist, armored skeptic.
Like every single one of them is deep in the sauce in Protestant metaphysics. And they all think that they disavow it entirely. Like they all believe in messianic eschatology. They just think the Messiah is Richard Dawkins instead of Jesus. Like, man. And when they get this sort of victim complex, atheists are an oppressed minority, that easily translates over into some other false conceptions of oppression that we see so frequently in super far right spaces like Fuentes. So I guess, in general, apolitical spaces, specifically those damn atheists. And I say that as one myself.
The most oppressed class, gamers.
Atheist gamers, double oppression.
I actually won a speech contest on that once. I wrote a speech about how gamers are oppressed. I was literally 12. And I won.
That's awesome. Where did the next question go? Oh God, it's going to take me a second to find it because that one I think was third. Okay, well actually no, that was a question immediately answered because that was the how do you de-radicalize people who fall into like the Fuentes spaces. I think we talked about that. Okay, there's the first question. Sorry, not quite that one. Hang on. Someone was asking the definition of a groiper, since that's a word we've kind of that might be a helpful term to define for some of the more like academic folks in the audience, simply because they're not as terminally online.
Yes. A groiper is based off of a meme of a frog. You may be familiar with such things. It's not Pepe. It's a similar one, sort of chunky looking fella. That was posted in 4chan and then came to be the sort of icon of this movement around 2019. So basically Fuentes encouraged members of his audience to go to like conservative, like more slightly moderate right-wingers like Charlie Kirk, for instance. That was the big one. They went to his events and they asked him questions that were misleading to try to get him to be racist in public. And that process of trying to take the mask off of the conservative is called groiping. And so groipers are people who are super, super far right and who want to essentially antagonize the people who are less far right than them to become more visibly racist in real life and subsequently take all of their, moderate friends and push them to the right alongside them.
Oh, I didn't realize that was like a verb. Like I just thought it was like a pet name. Okay, I didn't realize it actually ran there. Yeah. How do we know or how do we even measure how many people that watch these like I don't know, life coaches. They're not just like political commentators. It's like a life coach kind of thing. Like how fervent are they like their viewers? Because kind of like whenever something's banned, like a book's banned, I like want to buy that book immediately. Whenever a streamer is banned, I'm like, I got to check out this stream now. Like I got to figure out what Mr. Girl was like banned about. Like, I don't know. It's just like, thanks. You know, it's just, so, you know what I mean? So like how many people are like me, where it's just like kind of like looking in on the outside versus someone that's just kind of like lost in the sauce?
It is impossible to know, I think, for sure. But there's another group of people that you didn't count, which are fake views. And there's a lot of fake views that one can find by hitting right-click inspect and noticing what happens to the follower count on some of these websites. In any case, it's pretty difficult to tell for sure which of the ticking up numbers is like somebody who actually cares and is invested in this and somebody who just wants to check it out. But I think the best metric, since people who are checking it out will usually come and go, is by taking an average over a period of time, figuring out when it like spikes unreasonably or for weird situations, and when there's troughs. Like Fuentes will fall, like, I don't know if I want to say, but he averages around a pretty consistently low number of direct followers. When he does something like wacky in public, then there'll be like an extra 200 people that will watch that particular stream, which leads me to believe if you like subtract those out, then you can get a general sense of people who are like actual fans, you know?
Okay. Oh god, where was this question? This one I think was like not necessarily specific to this. Where to go? Hang on. I'm scrolling through a user card right now, so I'm trying to find it because I know who asked it. Where the fuck was it? It was. Oh, here we go. Here it is. How much do you think the international left will engage with Colombia after Petro gets in power next month? That's a very specific question, but worthwhile.
Couldn't tell you, man. Not my fort, unfortunately.
Ooh, I have a question. Reed, do you know who does the name Brittany ring a bell to you?
Politically provoked?
The very same.
Yeah, the one that pulled up wearing a burqa that covered like 25% of her hair and was like, I'm doing this for my misogynistic fans. Yes, I am familiar with Miss Brittany Politically Provoked.
I'm going to post a link to a TikTok of mine in Marcus's chat so that you can, this will be fun for you since you're in the space.
Yes.
Let me get this going.
Is this like Twitch TOS friendly? This TikTok?
Oh, yeah, well, it does include a clip of Fuentes, so I would save that for off screen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Don't want to get destinied.
Yeah. Oh, here's something we didn't kind of go over, the getting groiped kind of verbiage. There is a consistent issue on this platform of hate raids that come from a particular community.
Yeah.
So have you written anything about the kind of mobilization of hate that comes out of these communities?
I have not personally. I'm more interested in their internal dynamics, but Cynthia Miller Idris, that's Cynthia Miller -IDRIS and maybe one other S. She writes a good book on it, which I'm so bad at remembering the names of books.
It's okay.
It's called like Mobilizing Hate or something. Hold on. Oh my God. Come on. Books. Hate in the Homeland. There it is. Hate in the Homeland. I think a very compelling argument about how the mobilization of these communities occurs for primarily direct tactical purposes, such as, when they go on to like, here's an example. Whenever Right Wing Watch, which is a Twitter account that just literally reposts right-wing videos to be like, wow, look at them, they're being racist. Whenever Right Wing Watch posts a video of Fuentes, then a bunch of groypers go into the replies and are like, this looks based and cool. You should go see him on cozy.tv. And they post, a URL to it. And sometimes they even get like close to ratioed. I don't know if they've gotten fully ratioed, but I mean, so that's a clear example of tactical intervention. But there's also just a broader undercurrent, as I think I tend to emphasize in my work a little bit more, of like the audience creates itself from the context. But yes, there is like a very like concerted effort, and the groyping thing is, an example of that.
Okay, got it. Did we have anything else from chat, Marcus?
I'm waiting for one chatter to type up a question because they wanted to ask one and wanted to see if it was too late or not. So I think they're they're moving ellipses right now. If you could even visualize that through Chatterino. Got it. Actually, it's interesting you bring up the notion of hate rating because like a lot of the big, or I guess really just a lot of the concern from content creators on Twitch, like obviously the hate rates themselves are a pain in the ass to deal with, but like a lot of that mobilization of hate is directed at, marginalized people. And because either, algorithms or, incompetent human review, Twitch views these things and sometimes sees like, slurs and other awful things being said in the chat of the victim and not necessarily the perpetrator, and winds up actively taking action against the victim and their channel rather than the people who sent random chatters to see all this shit. So like it's almost, I think, more effective in terms of trying to, take marginalized voices out of a certain internet sphere via that tactic than people necessarily realize. But I think insofar as like your academic work is concerned, that might be something to touch on, because that hate can directly be weaponized with these small like internet micro communities to actively silence dissenters by abusing platform glitches essentially, or holes, faults with the system.
One of my friends mentioned that there are studies, so I haven't personally read them, but he said that there's a couple of empirical studies that confirm that a member of a marginalized community addressing a member of a like non-marginalized community and explaining how their oppression works is sometimes more likely to make the audience feel more likely to engage in that oppressive behavior, as sort of like an "I told you so" kind of effect, or like a haha sort of a victory lap kind of thing. And if that ends up being true, I need to actually go back and see if those studies exist or are any good. But if that's true, then I think that corroborates that point a little bit and kind of goes to show why those hate raids are so effective. It's not just like making people feel bad, right? It's also performing the ability that they can just go around and do that they live in a world where that's acceptable. That's why they keep saying, we're inevitable, we're going to win, because they like unironically think that, for one. And for two, that's how they get sort of their energy to keep on doing this.
So it's a flex. They're essentially just flexing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it's the victory lap after the sick own in the debate. It's the same kind of sentiment.
All right, we got our question, but first I'm just going to note your pupper is just going hog wild.
Yeah, I'm waiting for him to knock down the trellis back here, because it happened the other morning on stream, and I'm waiting for him to do it again.
Cute little guy. I think he might have tired himself out now.
He's upset. He's trying to get attention.
Oh, fair enough. All right, we got a question from chat. I think this is directed more at Reed. What do you think about gender critical feminists aligning with the alt-right and the Fox News sphere to further their hatred of trans people as an extension? How gender critical feminists use their historically oppressed status to leverage their hate for trans people and attempt to justify it.
Scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds.
That part. Oh man. Like, I think that the bit that's like the only people who think that gender is like this, static, sexual construct that exists across all society the same way are, Republicans and TERFs. That bit is just, true money. I think that there's a notion among a very small number of feminists. I think it's important to recognize and name that this is a very paltry minority of feminists in most contexts, except for maybe the island of England. But who cares what they have to think
Turf
about
Island.
anything? True. I think that there's the notion that if you allow for any sort of difference to exist within your class, because they think that gender is a class, then we're incapable of mobilizing solutions as a class. And those of us who understand, well, first off, we understand that gender is not a class for reasons that are probably a bit too verbose to get into now. But even if you think that it is, you know, the notion that there isn't alignment between people who have different experiences within a class in order to win, well, that's loser behavior. You're not going to win like that. Like, of course, it's silly when, you know, well-meaning cisgender liberals claim that there are absolutely no material differences between cis women and trans women, or cis women and trans, or cis men and trans men. That's like obviously observably false. But the things that we share in common are way more fundamental, for one, and impactful than the things that we have different. And our differences are also not to do with what we actually want. It's to do with the fact that we are, you know, labeled these gender categories and brought into the world that way. So I think it's a mixing of burdens. And then that falls into the right wing stuff because it's the same logic as the right wing. You know, I'm going to perfect myself as this like savior of the woman folk. And in doing so, I have to exclude everyone whose embodiment takes them outside of what the savior of the woman folk could be. And trans women are certainly outside of that purview.
Yeah. And there is also a lot of writings on the kinds of, once you've transitioned a class position, you become antagonistic towards the position that you were formerly in. It's kind of the same within like oppressed lines of intersectionality or lines of marginalization. Or, particularly white women in the suffragette movement were very exclusionary towards black women and trans women. So it's the same thing, rad femmes and femcells that want to be exclusionary to women of color and trans women. They see the gaining of rights, the alleviation of former oppression as a threat to their own privileges that they've been able to gain through today's context, no, action of their own.
True. And this is kind of a similar thing to the whole, right-wingers being secretly gay. There are a lot of chaser turfs out there. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of chaser turfs out there. There's turfs that will only date trans men because they see us as women, but still are straight, but also want to be political lesbians. Like, imagine explaining that to your mom. Yeah. Anyway, there's that. There's also, there's turfs who chase trans women, So the same model applies. Fetishism of what you want to be while excluding them because you can't be them to achieve this ideal vision of yourself.
Yeah. You'll see a lot of that, like, appropriation and fetishism within like turf circles where they'll say like, now's not the time, sweaty, which is like straight out of Black Twitter. Like, you're already appropriating like culture, you're appropriating like language. Not that like I really have any issues with that, but you can see like you're like playing into the own stereotype of yourself.
Exactly right. It's crazy. And yeah, I am trans. So chat. I haven't had chat up the entire time, and now I do. It's like,
don't look at chat. Don't look at chat. They're degenerates.
Same.
Interesting you bring that up, Graham, though. Yes, they are good, but also, this is totally irrelevant, but a little while ago, because apparently the government of Germany has some foresight, and their Ministry of Science Communication found my stream, and they actually interviewed me, like, in May. And so, like, the editor is just getting back to me. It's like, yeah, like, send me a picture of, like, Twitch chat of your stream for, like, the header of the article. And I went through a bunch of my clips and VODs and stuff, and I could not screenshot 99% of it because of excessive comments about Comm, Satanism, tossing salads, and all sorts of other stuff. Chat was incredibly horny in like every clip that I saw.
Yeah, chat's probably not the best thing you can send to him. You're like, maybe just a screenshot of the conversation.
No, I managed to find one, thankfully, where I had like a graph. I was like looking at the webcam, and chat was like not being horny. There was actually another good one, but then like I realized someone was linking me an article like about Nazis in the Guardian. But considering I'm sending this to the German government, it's probably not a good idea to have chat talking about Nazis in the screenshot. But all that being said, like, yes, chat can be degenerate, and that's why we like chat.
That's
all right, Captain Jackass in the chat. All right, calm down.
Calm down.
Okay, all right, you too.
Can't be doing that.
I was gonna say I'm missing those portions of Grumlow's stream. It must be very early in the morning when that happens.
It's usually like the first hour.
Yeah, I'm asleep by then, so I'll just wait for my own chat themed horny. On that note, I don't see any additional questions from chat, so Reed, go ahead and like, I think we should take this opportunity, take as much time as you want to plug anything really you want. You can plug yourself, let people know where to find you if you have any social media like Twitter. I know you just followed me because I saw that right before we started stream. So we can certainly plug your Twitter, but now's the time to plug yourself in whatever way you feel like it. So go for it.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And it's really been a pleasure, and I hope to be back. So I, tend to keep a relatively low internet profile for reasons that I hope are like really obvious. But I have a Twitter. It's Reed Van Schenck, ReedVanSchenck. That's like my professional, clean, nice Twitter. I also write sometimes on a relatively sort of just explaining a phenomenon in right-wing stuff in like relatively easy to understand terms. That blog is called Based on What 1917.blog. So you can read like bad takes at Based on What 1917.blog. And there's also in the Twitter, there's a link. You can see some other, slightly other more boring stuff. You can also find Pittsburgh Always Anti-Fascist, which is a little history project that I did for a digital scholarship series on anti-fascist activism in Pittsburgh throughout the 20th century. That's also posted in the little link tree in my Twitter bio. So if you're interested in checking that out, playing around with the maps that are up there, then please do. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. Yeah, I think Chad is definitely echoing, I think, our sentiment. We would absolutely love to have you back sometime. So, send me your Discord information so we can loop you in. And definitely, if you have any other like grad students who are like up to cool shit, we'd also love to talk to them and kind of have a similar conversation, especially if it pertains to terminally online content, because that's just a beautiful union. So,
most of us are, in fact, degenerates who couldn't get a job coming out of bachelor's school, so we had to go back to grad school. So,
yeah, we got degrees in being unemployed.
Oh, I know The Simpsons is already like there's at least 2 episodes that come to mind where they've made fun of that exact thing.
Oh man, don't remind me.
All right, Reed. Well, thank you again, very much appreciated. If you feel like sticking around, I don't know. Actually, we've almost had 3 hours actually, so I'm almost thinking it might be like bedtime for Graham, because I know you usually tap out around like the 3-hour mark.
Well, I have surgery in the morning, so I'm gonna go rest up. So
that's right. Yeah, actually, you deserve to rest before that.
Yeah, anyone who didn't see my tweet in chat that's like a regular in my streams or see in the Discord, my surgery got moved up by 3 hours, so I can't stream tomorrow. So I'll be back on Saturday.
Dude, grats on the partner app too, man.
Oh, thank you.
That's sick,
thank you.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I don't see why not. But
we'll probably get a rejection on the first one, and keep pushing for it. But James from the internet came in hot on that day and really juiced chat up to get my numbers right where they needed to be.
Hell yeah!
So we did the damn thing.
Hell yeah!
Yep. Oh, and Reed, if you're ever feeling up to it and you want to have a chat on my stream about literally anything, or we can literally just like shoot the shit about crazy stuff we see online, definitely reach out to me. in Discord or in my Twitter DMs. And if you're ever interested in starting your own Twitch thing, if ever you're feeling so inclined, definitely hit me up. We can get you started.
Yeah, hell yeah, man. We'll definitely be in touch.
I'm down.
I probably got to bounce at this point. I got work in the morning.
Yeah, this is usually the time where we kind of wrap it up. So we already had Reed give shout outs. So Grumlow and Greg, go for it.
You guys know where to follow me.
Yeah, I think we're good there.
Yeah.
Greg, go ahead.
Yep, we got a YouTube channel called The Peer Review, thepeer.review. Yeah, that's about it. Appreciate you guys. And another good conversation, as always. And yeah, it was very cool. I loved that the maps on your Pittsburgh Always Anti-Fascist stuff, where you actually, I love the context of like actually looking at the heat maps, and it really makes it feel connected. You're like connected to the events more. I thought that was really cool.
Thank you. That's the goal. Rigorous history with, some fun and games to keep people going.
Nice.
Perfect. All right. Chat next week, since we had a bit of a flip-flop between this week and next week. Next week is going to be career advice with Dr. Neuro. That's going to be an interesting conversation. I don't know if Professor Q is actually going to be able to make it as a panelist, considering his most recent experience with his government job, but that might be also a nice contribution to that conversation. But it's going to be, I think, a little bit more academically flavored, but at the same time, there might be some opportunity to discuss sort of the interdisciplinary or sort of like, off the beaten path career tracks for academics that might serve some political purpose. So certainly food for thought. So if you have any questions on that topic, start thinking about them and bring them to chat next week. Reed, thank you again for your time. Very much appreciated, and we'll certainly be in touch.
Cheers.
Adios. Universal Jobs
Night,
Program.
everybody.
You get a job. You get a job. You get a job. You get a job.
Jobs Oprah. That's what we need.
All right, guys. See ya.
See ya.
Adios.
Alrighty, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'm out of here.